Welcome to the no-fly zone, which brings legal thinkers and actors from around the world to speak virtually about pressing environmental law issues and to foster national and global knowledge exchange without generating travel-related greenhouse gas emissions. My name is Stephen Wood. I'm the director of the Center for Law and the Environment at the Allard School of Law at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Today, we are joined by Mumta Ito, the founder of the organization Nature's Rights, who will speak on the pressing topic of a new paradigm for law based on nested hierarchies of nature, people, and economy. I would like to start by acknowledging that the center, and the law school are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and that Indigenous peoples around the world are stewards of the majority of the world's remaining biodiversity and on the front lines of defending Mother Earth. Today's talk is going to be recorded, and the recording will be available on the website of the Center for Law and the Environment. We will have time for questions afterwards. We should have plenty of time for questions. If you have questions that you'd like to pose to Mumta, please make use of the Q&A buttons, the function which you find at the bottom of your Zoom panel. That way, if you pose questions in the Q&A, you can see what other questions other people have posed, and if you like them, you can upvote them. And when Mumta is done speaking, we will then pose questions to her. I'll moderate the Q&A. The chat function is also enabled. We welcome you to put into the chat where you are connecting from, in particular, including the Indigenous or First People whose territory you are a guest on. I will just now briefly introduce our speaker. We are really honored to be joined today by Mumta Ito, the founder of the organization Nature's Rights, and a remarkably energetic, inspiring advocate for the rights of nature and a new paradigm of earth-centered law, who has followed a fascinating life journey from being a high-powered corporate finance lawyer in the City of London to where she is today, which includes being an expert with the UN Harmony with Nature program and the initiator of a European Union Citizens Initiative to put nature's rights on the legislative agenda of the European Union. So a former top-ranking corporate finance lawyer in the city, she advised governments, multinational corporations, and investment banks until a time came where she had what she's described elsewhere as something of a spiritual reawakening, and turned her energy toward restoring the fundamental unity and interconnectedness of humans and their environment. As co-founder of the Virgin Islands Environmental Council, she was instrumental in a very landmark victory to protect a marine ecosystem that is of global ecological significance through community organizing, bringing a landmark lawsuit, and creating legislative change. And of course, she's done a great deal since then and continues to inspire people around the world with her work, her energy, her optimism about nature's rights. So I will turn it over now to Mumta. Thank you so much for joining us. And we really look forward to hearing what you have to say and share with us.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm very honored to be here with you all and to share what I have to share today. And I'd encourage all of you as well to ask me questions. Ask me questions about anything that you're curious about, including if you want to hear more about, you know, me on a personal level and my journey. I'm very open to sharing things about that side of things too. But firstly, I will be speaking about nature's rights and about the integrated approach that we've been promoting here in the European Union. So to do that, let me share my screen. I'm going to walk through some slides with you. Okay, so let me just okay, so here we'll start. If we look at the logo of my organization, Nature's Rights Transform the System, we've had so many examples of rights of nature coming into law over the past years. But quite often the emphasis, and particularly from those who haven't studied earth jurisprudence or are not attuned to the idea behind earth jurisprudence, that nature's rights is purely a litigation tool. And this is something that I want to steer us away from, that rather than seeing nature's rights as a litigation tool, we very much see it as a tool to bring about systemic transformation. As we know, we are in dire straits as far as nature is concerned in our world today. And the causes of all of this is the fundamental orientation of our system. But our societal systems don't just operate of their own volition. All the actions of the system are dictated by law, by the code. If our human society was a living being, law is like the DNA. It's the code by which our society is expressing itself. And I want to go into a little bit more detail with some of the slides as to why and the how. But I want to really get this from the beginning. You know, when we talk about nature's rights, are we thinking of a litigation tool, or are we thinking of using law in a deeply transformative way to bring about deeper systemic shifts in our society? So this is our stance. There is no environment. We are the Earth's extended body. And it's this interconnectedness that is missing from our legal system. The rights of nature form the fundamental basis of our human right to life, yet it's completely unacknowledged in our legal system. And law doesn't recognize a relationship between us and the rest of nature, let alone that it's our most fundamental relationship. So here, there is no environment. We are the Earth's extended body. Places, you know, an even greater closeness or an even greater proximity, an even greater sense of responsibility towards the Earth than just saying, oh, we are part of nature, or we are interconnected with the rest of nature. Yes, we are a part of nature. We are interconnected with the rest of nature, but also we are nature. we are nature. I mean, nature expresses itself through the 5 elements and expresses itself through our bodies, which are made up of the 5 elements as well. I mean, all the building blocks in nature are also present within us. And even our own bodies are not our own. Our gut is a huge ecosystem of many, many microorganisms. Even our breath is not our own breath. It's a shared breath with every other breathing life form on this planet. So really, I'd like everybody just to entertain that stance that there is no environment. We are the Earth's extended body. And if we are to make laws from that standpoint, we would do things very differently. So here, if we are to look at our human society as an iceberg, so this is the famous Iceberg Model. We applied it to nature's rights, our current society, our system of law. Everything that we see, all the negative outcomes, the crises, the ecological crisis, the inequality, poverty, pandemics, climate crisis, food crisis, economic crisis, 6th mass extinction, all of these crises are just what's visible above the watermark. Yet, what we don't see are all of the structures, the paradigm, and the consciousness that stands beneath those crises and that generate these crises on autopilot. So here, if we go down the iceberg, we see we have silo systems and structures which operate in isolation to each other. So you've got agriculture operating separate to energy, operating separate to economy, operating separate to environment, and they don't talk to each other. The systems are not integrated, and the laws that deal with all of these different areas are kept separate. And as far as nature is concerned, you know, it's the objectification of nature, or the characterization of nature as objects, property, and resources that enables the structures to and the legal structures to operate in isolation of each other like that. All of that, if we go one deeper, comes from the mechanistic paradigm, the human being separate to nature, and things being dealt with in the natural world as if they're items in a shopping cart, that you can take one thing out, deal with it, and it won't have a knock-on effect on everything else. Which of course is not true in a radically fluid and interconnected world that science now recognizes and has been known for some time. If we go one deeper than that, all this arises from separation consciousness, where we see ourselves as separate to the rest of nature, separate to each other, separate entities. Which, if we are to go one deeper on this, or look at what is the sea around this iceberg that's causing this iceberg, this separation consciousness, this splitting or fragmentation to happen in the first place, and it's trauma. All of this sits on a bedrock of trauma where people have been forcibly separated from the land, separated from our most fundamental relationships, separated from nature. In Europe, for example, we have the enclosures, we have the systematic burning of the witches being a generic name that was given to medicine women who were deeply connected with nature and did herbal medicines and things like that. This was seen to be a crime, and this went on for a few centuries here in Europe. Some of these traumas, like in the enclosures came in on the back of property rights, which is something that was not a thing until some lawyer dreamt up, that, well, if nature belongs to nobody, then it's there for the taking. And it's there for the taking for those who can enclose nature and exclude others. And so people were forcibly thrown off the land very violently. which then got exported to other countries in the form of colonialism and so on. And so this exclusionist, extractionist form of law developed and led to the issues that we have today. So as you can see, just by reducing carbon emissions, it's not really going to solve all of this. And we can also see that law is a key perpetrator in this systemic picture. It's not just a passive thing that's, you know, oh, law is just, you know, something. I mean, if we look at how much money goes into lobbying from corporations, and I used to represent investment banks. If a multinational or an investment bank wants to do something, they change the law first. They get the law on their side. But us in the environmental movement, we think we can just keep protesting and carry on exhausting ourselves by dealing with the top part of the iceberg without dealing with any of the lower levels, the deeper levels, and stacking the law in our favor. And I've been, you know, quite outspoken in trying to educate people, particularly legal professionals, that we do need a paradigm shift in law. So coming back to the iceberg, again, the top part of the iceberg, this is the part that environmental law deals with, crisis management. It manages the externalities of the system without actually affecting the way the system operates in itself. This is also where most of our societal solutions operate, where most of the NGOs are targeting, you know, where most of the funding goes as well towards crisis management and solving effects. Yet the iceberg remains intact. Now, this iceberg leads to the degenerative cycle, or the death cycle, as I call it. You know, so in law, this mechanistic worldview, this separation consciousness, law entrenches it by the very way that law is held and implemented in our society. It separates people. It's literally, you know, a battle of papers. Courts are a battle. You know, if you look at, you know, take divorce law, for example. Do you know anybody who's gone through the courts, you know, in a divorce case, coming out more connected and more healed as a family? No. You know, so law is not a purveyor of healing in our society. Yet the original meaning of the word lawyer was a healer of the community's woes. So this is how far we have come away from the roots of what our profession, law, is supposed to be about, healers of conflict, you know, to this this kind of institutionalized legal system. I mean, originally, law was a set of agreements between people as to how we would govern our community, as to what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. And it was not assumed that the law in one town would be the same as the law in another town. Gradually, with the rise of property rights and all the institutions that built up because of that, you know, there was a shift, a gradual shift towards deeper and deeper institutionalization of law, until we have ended up with a system so deeply institutionalized that we feel we have no ability to affect it. We have no ability to change these structures. And also the majority of people feel that law has nothing to do with us. Yet law is a reflection of our own consciousness. And there is a need for us to reclaim law and to start interacting with this process and speaking out that we want deep systemic shifts in the legal system itself. So law is, it's win-lose, it's mechanistic, adversarial, retributive, all things that help to entrench the separation consciousness and the mechanistic paradigm. But law doesn't have to be that way. So another feature of how law is in the mechanistic paradigm is that the problems are dealt with in isolation to each other, and it ignores the impact on the whole. With regard to nature, so law actually legalizes all of the destruction by treating nature as objects, property, and resources. So most of the causes of all of these negative outcomes, the degenerative outcomes, I call it, are because of the legalization of what I call degenerative structures and systems, like economy based on infinite growth, like energy that depletes nature faster than she can replenish, like agriculture and food systems that poison the earth and people, and so on. And so by legalizing all of this and then just dealing with the negative effects, we're not really, we are part of the problem. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Law is not a passive bystander, it's a perpetrator. It's a perpetrator in this business, and we need to change that. We have a responsibility, and you as law students, the next generation, need to stand up. You know, you need to work with deeper awareness, and you need to speak up, and you need to demand the bigger chips. So degenerative structures, institutionalizing and legalizing the damage to nature, then of course leads to degenerative outcomes. Degenerative outcomes, you know, like pandemics and climate crisis and food crisis and sixth mass extinction, all of this lead to more suffering and trauma. And more suffering and trauma strengthens the separation paradigm. So how do we get out of this degenerative death cycle, as I call it? Well, we need to change the paradigm. We need to transform the system, and we need to embody the change. So this is where, you know, my personal experience also, like Stepan explained in the beginning, I wasn't working for nature's rights until something on a personal level shifted very deeply in me, and I started to feel that the earth and I are one. You know, I am nature, and as nature, I can no longer continue to work against nature in anything that I do. And we all need to have that deeply embodied relationship. We need that deeply embodied personal connection in order to be effective earth lawyers. We need to be out there spending time in nature. We need to be really connected in our bodies, our minds, our spirits. You know, we need to show up whole, not just as brains and heads. You know, our thinking needs to be connected with the cellular knowledge in our bodies that connect with the earth. So yeah, so changing the paradigm, transforming the system. I mean, we could be like Ecuador and we put a paradigm shift in the constitution that all of nature is Pachamama, a living deity, you know, beautiful words. But then if it's not integrated in all levels of law and throughout the entire legal system, it cannot take root, you know, and we end up with the problem that we get something, nature's rights, we drop it into this system that works against nature's rights, and it ends up being just a litigation tool. So here's the future society without nature's rights. So we start with the healing of trauma on individual and collective level, which gives rise to unity consciousness. From unity consciousness, we get the holistic paradigm or worldview, where we are part of the web of life. We are nature. And from there, we start to create whole system structures that don't operate in isolation, whole system structures that are integrated around this common worldview. Now, if we start to seed that unity consciousness, if we start to encode that into law, we start to make laws that recognize the interconnectedness of all living beings. And a fundamental tool that starts from where we are, but has the potential to widen and open into new, innovative, much more innovative instruments as time goes, is nature's rights. Because if we don't have, if nature is objects, property, and resources, and we reframe that and we say, no, nature is rights-bearing living entity, but not just rights-bearing living entity. I mean, rights-bearing living entity, even just on its own, establishes that we are now in relationship, in law, a relationship, fundamental relationship that has been missing. But that is not enough to get the holistic worldview, as I'll come to in my next slide, as to how can we implement nature's rights, and you get the full picture. But just as a snapshot, when you're starting with unity consciousness and you encode that in law, you end up with whole system structures that operate in an integrated way to produce positive outcomes like regenerative economies, pandemic resilience, health and well-being, climate resilience, food security resilience, thriving ecosystems, thriving biodiversity. And then this gives rise to what I call the regenerative cycle. And here, now, to get the regenerative cycle in law, we have to move towards, from the adversarial mindset in law to a win-win and a systemic win approach. And this involves whole systems and problem-solving approaches to law, not just adversarial, because adversarial entrenches separation, and we want to bring people on board, we want to re-educate people, we want to drive positive action. Which is something that we can see, like take the Chevron case. Still 20 years later, the company has not done what it's supposed to do. And we need to get out of this mindset that you can just pay a certain amount of money or, and the problem goes away. Yeah. So in this, the regenerative cycle, law is based on interdependence to scale up solutions. Nature has legal personhood, rights, and this operates to make the destructive structures and systems illegal. So if it's embedded in law in the way I'll come to in my next slide, it won't be possible to have an economy based on infinite growth if that infinite growth is going to damage the source of life, and you'll see how we come to that. So in this model, instead of law acting to manage the externalities of a system that's geared towards destruction, law tackles the root causes, and it encodes that new paradigm in all of the levels of law to drive systemic change from a much deeper level. So nature is represented in this model in economic, political, social, legal decision-making as a stakeholder, but not just as an equal stakeholder. So this is another place, I know a lot of people in nature's rights movement say, well, nature has to be equal to humans. I say, no, nature is not equal to humans, because we are utterly dependent on the rest of nature in order to function. We are wholly dependent. It's sort of almost like it's like the mother and the fetus, without this, we are like a fetus in the womb, that's the position of us in nature. We're not equal partners, like people say, because that assumes that if nature went away, we can still happily continue. Well, we can't. We literally are a fetus in the womb, wholly dependent on nature. And so we need a model for nature's rights that reflects that. And so this is where I'll come to next. So this model here is the topic of our talk. If we look at our current model for sustainability, it's, by the way, not been updated since the 80s. And it's also not reflective of reality, and there's no legal framework to enforce it. And anyway, we have people, economy, and nature as three intersecting circles. If we're to look at the legal framework around it, we have human rights representing people. We have economy represented through corporate and property rights. Nature has no rights in this model. And in this model, people and economy are in an adversarial relationship to each other. So human rights and corporate rights are in adversarial relationship. And also, I mean, the relationship is not equal. It's there's a fiction in law that they are equal, but of course they are not, because human rights are only operate in the realm of public law, but corporate and property rights operate in the realm of public and private law. So they're enforceable against everyone, but human rights are only enforceable against governments. And so if we took nature's rights and we just dropped it into this kind of a system, which is what has been happening in all the examples. And I'm not saying that all the examples are wrong at all, because we have to start somewhere. And so people have started somewhere, and, you know, and this is huge, this is great. But all I'm saying is that we get the criticism of why isn't it working, and I'm presenting why it's not working. Because it's still not, because what we've done is taken nature's rights and we put it into the death cycle. We need to use it in a much deeper way. So here, if we took nature's rights and we dropped it into the current sustainability model, you know, with or the current system of rights as they are at the moment, you could end up with a scenario where nature's rights is treated like human rights, and it's operating only in public law, not private law, and not enforceable against corporations, which would be completely ridiculous, because, you know, as we can see from the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, over 50% of the people in the meeting were the multinational corporations in the negotiations. So governments don't hold the power anymore. And this is why, you know, human rights needs a whole reframing. You know, corporate rights need, the whole rights framework needs a fundamental reframing of the very notion of rights and how they're held in society. So in the nature's rights model, we say, well, this model, the people, economy, and nature that we have at the moment, the sustainability, is not reflective of reality, because it assumes that each one can operate independently. But in reality, economy cannot operate without people. People cannot operate without nature. And so economy can also not operate without nature. But nature can happily operate without the other two. And so we need a legal framework that's reflective of the natural orders in life, and reflective of the actual situation that we have in the world. So in our nature's rights model, we see what we actually have is not 3 interlinking circles, but we have 3 concentric circles. We have a nested hierarchy of systems. And from that, we can map out a nested hierarchy of rights. So nature's rights is not, human rights and nature's rights are not equal. Human rights and corporate rights are not equal, and they are not in adversarial relationship with each other in our model. So in our model, human rights are embedded within nature's rights, because human beings are a subsystem of nature, and so human rights are a subsystem of nature's rights. And economic rights, and I call it economic rights here in the nature's rights model, not just corporate and property, because that arguably needs a reframing as well, you know. So economic rights are a subsection of human rights and a subsection of nature's rights. And so, you know, they're also embedded within, they're encompassed within nature's rights. And it's this kind of framing that hasn't happened yet, that we have been proposing to the European Union when we did a study for an EU Fundamental Charter for the Rights of Nature for the European Economic and Social Committee. They wanted to know, you know, how can there be a nature's rights framework that takes into account the other rights. And so this was the model that we proposed for them. So if we are to look at, so how will it work in practice? We take our 3 circles, nature, people, and economy. We can map out the UN Sustainable Development Goals onto each of those circles. And then if we add a 4th circle, the planetary boundaries, we end up with a comprehensive model for the implementation of a system of governance based on Earth jurisprudence. And here, as you can see, at the moment, like I said before, there's no legal framework for sustainability. And, you know, the legal framework that we have is more about sustaining development, and so are the policies, rather than sustaining life. And so here we come up with a legal framework for sustaining life in right relationships. So our reframing of the notion of rights by making it this nested hierarchy of rights brings it closer to the ancient wisdom traditions that recognize the concept of right relationship. So it's a relational and an ecosystemic view of rights rather than an adversarial one. So here, so we have economic rights, human rights, and nature's rights. As you can see, the economic rights fits within the human rights, and the human rights fits within nature's rights, and all of that fits within the planetary boundaries. And this is the starting point for how I feel we should be changing our governance system and changing our legal system to come up with a proper legal governance system for sustaining life on Earth for generations to come. So here I put my contact details. I just want to share with you also this painting is an image that my sister painted. It's of an extinct elk, and superimposed in it is the Sri Chakra Yantra, which is a sacred energy pattern from the traditions of India that represents the universal energy pattern that governs all of life in sacred reciprocity or in harmony. And I'd invite you just to take a moment and just empty your mind and just sit with this image and just feel your body, feel what this image is speaking to you on a level that's not in your head. Yeah, and just absorb that for a moment. And whilst we're absorbing it, we can also think of all of the great loss of life through extinction that's happening daily on the planet. And we can just send, you know, a prayer from our hearts out that we, as the future generation of law, are going to make the change. Thank you. So when we're ready, I'm open to take questions.
Well, I think you can hear us now. Thank you so much, Mumta. That was very moving, and especially the moment at the end when we looked at the image that your sister created. And I know that there is loss connected there on a personal level for you as well. So yeah, it's very special that you shared that with us. And it's, I think, a really valuable, I have to press another button. Turn this panel. Oh yes, now I think now we should be able to, the audience can probably see now. And I apologize to everybody who's watching or listening. The technical systems that we are working with right now today are a little bit complicated for my limited abilities. But here we are. So yeah, thank you once again, Mumta. There are a couple of questions, and I also have a couple of questions I wanted to pose to you. So let me start out with a question to you, and then we'll go to the queue of questions, which is coming up in the Q&A function. Can you tell us what, in practical terms, the citizens' initiative that you are spearheading seeks to achieve? What would success actually look like at the European Union level, in your view?
Yeah, in my view, it would be, if the success would be the European Union actually implementing what I presented in those slides with, yeah, with the integrated view of nature's rights and the, you know, aligned with, yeah, the reframing of the notion of rights, the integration of the planetary boundaries, sustainable, all within the legal framework. Yeah, yeah, basically that last slide would be my goal.
And a follow-up.
And as I say, that goal is not the end result, then the work starts.
Of embodying all of that in practice, embodying the change. At the very base of the icebergs, the first iceberg there is trauma, and the second iceberg there is healing. What do you, like, especially if you understand the trauma in terms of these historical dispossessions, exclusions, and alienations, what would healing that trauma look like?
Yeah, so, you know, I would say that some of this healing on a big systemic level, I felt is already beginning, you know. So for example, with the Pope's encyclical, when he formally went to South American nations and apologized, you know, I feel in a systemic sense, that was huge, you know. So a lot of it is, yeah, these making of formal apologies. But we don't need to wait until, you know, until nations start apologizing. Already, you know, I felt it was so beautiful what you did right at the very beginning, where you invited people to introduce themselves in relation to the ancient territories that they were guests on. You know, just that acknowledgement goes a huge way towards healing these entrenched traumas between groups. But on a much more personal level, I've been working a lot with a modality that I love. And I know there are some other people like Otto Scharmer from MIT with his, I don't know if you've come across his U Labs and Theory U, but he also works with the systemic constellation process. So the systemic constellation process has many, many wide varying applications, although some because you cannot scientifically prove yet in the current paradigm of science how it works. There are people who have been, I've noticed, discrediting it on Wikipedia, saying, you know, it's a pseudoscience and don't go anywhere near it. But to be honest, there are a lot of good things that are called pseudosciences that can be the way out of the mess that we are currently in, that can be very helpful for accelerating the shifts in paradigm that we need to do. So I have worked a lot with systemic constellations, and I know Otto Scharmer is as well. He has been clever enough to call it something else, and so people don't get caught in that mind space that it's a pseudoscience. And basically, it's a way of being able to represent what is actually happening in a system, and to be able to see where the system is blocked, and to be able to unblock this through certain movements that happen. And whenever we do this, we notice that the changes are reflected in the collective consciousness. So, you know, so I've also been doing systemic constellation workshops with people to heal trauma related to disconnection from nature. And I feel that the more of us can feel that direct experiential connection with nature, the quicker the shift will go.
And there's so much that could be said on that front. I'm a person who I support the idea that there can be synergies between what you're calling those pseudosciences and the harder sciences of complex adaptive systems. I don't think they have to be in tension at all. What you were just saying pointed us a little bit toward one of the questions, actually the first question that was put in the Q&A from Daniel, which asks, to what extent do you know about the conscious, intelligent beings behind nature, and are you aware of us being able to ask them how to cooperate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have also gone through my own personal exploration with this, and have done a lot of learning as well from Indigenous people who are extremely connected, like the Corgi in the Sierra Nevada in Colombia, for example, and also through the Indigenous wisdom traditions that I have been born into from India, the yogic system in India, which sees the interconnectedness of all life and multiple dimensions of reality coexisting. So yes, we are all able to tap into this. And one of the beauty of the systemic constellation process, which actually does have its roots in an Indigenous system of healing, but was kind of formulated so it could be accessible by anybody, anywhere, without, you know, any ritual or any kind of special abilities. You know, systemic constellation can be participated in by absolutely anyone at any level of disconnection or connection. Yeah, so one way is through this constellation you can tap into. So I've done constellations where you can actually have represented different nature intelligences, and you can learn, you know, information is generated. But I would encourage people to, you know, if you work with Indigenous people, do work with people who are genuine and who have a very good reputation, because even in the Indigenous space, there are people who are not quite as, you know, you don't need to work with plant medicines or anything like that in order to get connected with nature and to be able to develop greater capacities. You can do it through meditation. Yeah, you don't need to take substances in order to do this, you know, which is one of the misperceptions that people have, you know. Yeah, I would encourage everybody to dive deeper into that. There are also some people in this space working with interspecies communication, notably a lady called Anna Bradenbach, who had a famous online communication with a panther, which went viral because she was getting information from the panther that nobody would have known except for the ranger that was dealing with the panther. And, you know, so I have done some training with Anna Bradenbach, and she also, it's very accessible. You know, the first thing she says is, I'm not going to teach you anything new. I'm just going to make you aware of something that is happening all the time that we've learned to block out.
Thank you. There are other questions that actually follow on very well from what you've just talked about. I'm going to combine a few of Raquel's questions into one. She, first of all, notes the work of the Anishinaabe legal scholar at University of Victoria, John Burroughs, and asks whether his work helps. I don't know if you're familiar with John's work, but I wanted to mention that because I think that he is a leading Indigenous legal thinker on these issues. But Raquel goes on to say that she's writing a brief right now for city councillors. Do I choose to be brave enough to start introducing this language? Oh dear, where to start? So what advice would you have for someone who's working at that practical level?
Yeah, I mean, I would, I'll send you, I have a 5-minute recording of that presentation that goes through everything quite neatly. You know, I present what I presented to you to people in our institutions, and I've not met anybody who's, I mean, I have met people like our Commissioner for the Environment, who got a bit hot under the collar and said, yeah, maybe we should have a stakeholder conference about this European Charter, you know, to present the idea. They get it. They're, of course, it makes people uncomfortable because they realize that, oh, this is, it's quite a big change, you know, it's quite a big change. But the vast majority of people, I haven't met anybody who could turn around and say that model is flawed because of X, Y, Z. Nobody's been able to say that to me so far. So yeah, so if you do come across people who feel that the model is flawed because of X, Y, Z, I'd love to learn from them. And maybe we continually reinvent and until we get a better model. But so far, that's kind of where I've come out at, based on the learnings that I've gotten on this journey.
And it's worth pointing out also that city level politicians and local communities are amongst the most courageous and sort of forward thinking about these issues around the world. Hundreds or thousands of local level governments, local indigenous governing bodies as well, have enacted declarations, ordinances, and local laws that recognize the personality of rivers and ecosystems and watersheds, and recognize that they're not only that they have rights, but also that, as you say, those rights are not equal to the property and private rights of you know, companies and people who want to do things that are destructive of nature. So I think there may be more receptivity to these sorts of ideas amongst city councillors in various places than people might think.
Yes, I feel so, definitely, you know, that especially starting with those that have already gone in the direction of recognizing nature's rights, to try and evolve them a further step and say, you know, this is where we're really heading with this, is deeper systemic change. And would you like to be a forerunner, you know, that can be a little bit more vocal on presenting a more integrated view of sustainability? And also, yeah, I mean, we're very, you know, I'm very happy to help to consult with any, you know, any organization or municipality who would like to learn a bit more about how they could integrate these things. We're very happy to help.
And you've given the contact email there on your final slide. Raquel was also asking about whether the slides can be shared, and I don't think that was the only comment in that direction. Are those 3 slides, especially those ones that really capture the central ideas, are they available on a website, the Nature's Way
Yeah,
website?
so I'm just, because of, you know, so much interest since I did the study and, you know, have come up with these slides, I'm actually in the process of putting a website together that walks through all of that, you know, to make it more accessible. But in the meantime, I have recorded a 5-minute presentation over the slides. And I can send that to you, Stefan, and then you can share it with whoever would like it, you know, and yeah.
Great. Yeah, we can post a link to that or even post the video on our website, whatever works for you.
Sure.
We have time for a couple more brief questions, and there are 2 more questions. One from Alice is asking, what is the current status of the draft EU directive that you initiated? And what about Brexit? Since Brexit, is there any hope for the UK to adopt something similar in future?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the UK, so Brexit is, you know, very sad for people like me. And the only hope is Scotland wants to have another referendum on independence and go back in the EU, which from a perspective, you know, the perspective of nature, I feel would be a lot more positive. What could be done in the UK? If we think that, you know, the UK was the host of the COP26, and during that time, they approved new concessions for fossil fuel contracts. They gave the go-ahead to dump sewage into the rivers. And they did that all during the COP26, you know, as if we don't care. We don't care what anybody thinks or what anybody says. You know, while there were 100,000 people marching in the streets of Glasgow, you know, that was what our UK government were doing. So I'm more optimistic that things could happen in Europe. Just while I was there in Glasgow, I met with a professor from Spain, a law professor, who brought a Nature's Rights initiative for the rights of the Mar Menor, which is a sea. And this was during the pandemic. And she said that they had to collect 600,000 signatures in person. So people had to show up in person at the town hall and sign. And this was during the lockdown. And she said that initially it was very slow going, but after a while, there was a day when all of the fish in the sea were dead. And, you know, and then the people just started coming in the droves. And she said it was quite beautiful to see because there were grandmothers and there were mothers. It was mostly women who came, women who'd never been activists before in their lives, and they came, you know, saying, I'm signing for my grandchildren, I'm signing for my children, I'm signing for my great-grandchildren. And you know, this was really heartening. And there's also another initiative just started recently in Bavaria, calling for a referendum to include the rights of nature in the constitution. And there's another initiative just in the planning stages, which is for a constitutional reform in Germany, including the rights of nature. Now, of course, yeah, the Spanish one didn't include the integrated model. I don't know, how far the one who's organizing the Bavarian referendum came to a presentation that I made and asked for the slides and was very, excited about it. So fingers crossed, but I don't know how much they can include in these kinds of initiatives, But with our EU Fundamental Charter initiative, I feel that that's where we can really push for this sort of change. Yeah, because it's on a wider level, on a deeper level. And if we do get that charter, then I feel that, we're in a very good position after that, for changing the frame. But I continue to educate and to spread the message, and I hope that people in the rights of nature movement will start moving more in the integrated direction, because we've done phase one, which is getting the concept of the rights around. Now it's getting it to work, which involves a big shift in the legal system.
Well, thank you so much. That is where we will need to leave it. There is an excellent question from Alessio asking you to go into more detail about how the current economic and legal structures support the mechanistic worldview, but I feel that you could carry us on for another hour on that question. So we will have to leave that for another time. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a real privilege to hear from you about these things and to be inspired by your analysis and your example. So thank you so much. I'll just say once again that the recording of this session will be available on the website of the Center for Law and the Environment, probably within the next several days to a week. I really appreciate once again your joining us. So thank you so much, Mumta.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.